Hi everybody, it's Jim Douthit here along with
Leslie
Hubert. She's here with me. I'm actually here with her. It's spring break here for me in Oklahoma, but I drove up to Exeter, Missouri, and we're going to tag team this week's, or the next 2 weeks, thoughts from the end of a red pen. You know, Leslie had a great idea a few weeks ago. She came up with the top 10 things that you should know as teachers in your classroom. And so that's what we're going to go over.
All right, there are just so many things that as first-year teachers you can get bogged down with, and so I wanted to highlight the top 10 things that I considered that will sabotage your classroom management if you allow it to. And it's things that you typically don't think of on a regular basis that you just do inadvertently and don't even realize it. And it could also be things that were never taught to you not to do at the college level, and I think it's important that colleges understand that as first-year teachers they need to preempt a lot of this stuff, and so I chose 10 things, and it's based off of another teacher's blog, and so we'll get into that here in a little bit, but.
And I think it's important for you guys to know too, is because a lot of the things, me as a third-year teacher, some of the language that I use in the classroom doesn't necessarily is not advantageous for my kids, especially as sixth graders. And so some of the words like, and we'll get to it in a few minutes, not using the word don't. I don't think I use that all the time. As a parent, we quickly use things like that, but those are things you don't want to use in the classroom. So yeah. Here we go. Let's see it.
And here's number one. The first thing that you always want to try and avoid, and I have a hard time sometimes with this, is when you smile at a student who is being disruptive and knowingly being disruptive, or a student who is acting out in any other way in the classroom and it just happens to be funny. I mean, we all like to be humorous, and so we want to make sure that our students see that humorous side of us, but in a lot of cases it's just not an appropriate time for you to smile, because it's allowing that student to know, hey, she thinks I'm funny and I'll just keep going. This is something that hits home to me, especially here at Exeter. I have run into a lot of situations where I have students that need to be disciplined, and they need to be disciplined fairly quickly. But I've recognized that these students don't do well when you do it publicly and do it in front of the whole class. And I would say, especially any teacher from elementary up, when you pick on a student and discipline them, the first thing that they are going to react with is defensive mode. I wasn't doing anything, or, well, so-and-so is doing the same thing. Why are you picking on me? And so then you get into a power struggle, and once you're in that power struggle, you lose. It's just a given. There's no way out of it, and essentially, because you're in that power struggle, you ultimately want to win too, and then so you're just going to sit there and argue with a kid when you've just now wasted all of this class time.
And I think a lot of times too that simple things that go on in the classroom can be handled. Not only you need to handle them privately, which is great, but a lot of times just walking up to a student and touching him on the shoulder, or acknowledging even eye contact, letting you know or they know that you know that you're watching them, or that you've seen whatever they're doing that's inappropriate. A lot of times that'll squander it, especially in the middle school and probably in the elementary. Only give verbal instructions. Now this was something that it was interesting when I first saw this slide. I didn't quite understand what Leslie was talking about, but the more I realized it, the more it makes sense to me. So the verbal instructions, a lot of times, if you only give that verbal instructions, students are tuning you out in class. And so having that written, whether it's up on your smartboard or your whiteboard, having written instructions in front of them helps them understand what's going on. I think I read somewhere where a student or people in general need to hear something 3 times before it sticks. Having that written or that oral communication with a student is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. If you have it written on the board, you say it. You have students write it down, or if you're doing some technology work, you also send it to them, maybe in a message, or have it on the assignment itself, then they're going to see it multiple times, and the more they see it, the more they remember. I can't even tell you how many times I have said something to students more than once and they still don't get it. So I've even caught myself where I'm like, okay, I got to write this down. So I post it on the board and leave it up for the rest of the class period, and then still verbally remind them.
Right.
And they need that constant reminder. And it's not because they don't care or that they're necessarily being apathetic. It's just even as adults, we need that constant reminder. And there are people learn in different ways. So
Men especially.
yeah.
From what your mom tells me all the
So
time.
here we have 4 and 5. Go ahead.
So one of the things that you want to avoid doing in your classroom is addressing the class before everyone is quiet. There are so many times when I've had a loud class and they just cannot get calmed down, especially right after the bell rings. They're getting to their seats.
After lunch.
After lunch especially. And so if I stand up here and just shout over them or try to shout over them, they are not going to stop talking. They're not going to get quiet as fast as I want them to. So usually I'll give them a verbal command like, okay, the bell's rang, let's go. And I'll clap my hands. And then I just stand in the middle of the room and I wait until they're ready. And a lot of times they'll take care of the problem themselves. And either by telling each other to be quiet, and sometimes in a not so friendly way, or just sitting there waiting patiently and hoping everybody
Last
else.
year, or my first year, I should say, I tried to shout over them, and I've got a voice that carries. Everybody will tell you that I do, but that gets old really quick, and it loses its vigor, if you will, if you continually shout all the time. So just standing there and saving your voice.
And number 5, talk when students are supposed to be reading.
And vice versa. Something that it's so funny that she brought this up, because when I was doing my student teaching, Mrs. Susan Holt, who was a great mentor teacher for me, one of the first PowerPoints that I put up on the board I was very proud of, was it really excited to get going. My students were writing and taking notes, 6th graders. Put it up on the board, I read it to them aloud, then I gave about a 30-second pause, and then I just started going, teaching. Man, and just all the stuff that was in my head, I was just throwing out at them. And I didn't realize it till after the class was over. They took about half the notes because they were all busy listening to me and not paying attention to what they were writing down. And so Mrs. Holt was great. She was like, "What are you doing? You acted nervous." And I was like, "I wasn't nervous. I was excited." You got to remember, you got to give, especially middle schoolers, I'm sure it's the same in high school, you got to give them that opportunity to write the things down on the board that you think is important to them.
Well, it's hard for them to grasp that when the teacher is talking and they should be writing or taking notes of anything, then they have to be able to learn how to do that. But it takes them a long time to learn that skill. And so I find myself even struggling with jumping right into something. And when you wanna read a passage really fast or go through the notes really fast, but you also want them to take notes, I have to constantly remind myself to slow down and to let them catch up. And a lot of times there's those awkward moments where I'm ready to move on and it's kind of like, okay, we need to go, but they're still writing notes and I have to wait on them because otherwise they're going to miss some of the vital information.
Well, that's it for this week's Thoughts from the End of the Red Pen. We gave you our 5 of our 10 things that we think you need to know when you're in the classroom. So what are we going to hear from? What are we going to talk about next week?
We're going to be looking at just different behavior interventions and different thoughts that teachers should be anticipating in the classroom. Things like don't say don't all the time.
Don't say don't all the time.
But we'll talk about it.
Did you hear that, honey? Don't say don't all the time to me. Daniel, you too, here. Anyway, I know. All right, that's it for this week. We'll see you guys next week.